Sometimes the smallest acts of kindness change us in ways we never expect. When we open our hearts to help another living soul, we discover something profound about ourselves that we never knew existed. In the harsh desert of New Mexico Territory in 1883, Cowboy Thomas Riley was riding home when he spotted something that would change his life forever. There, caught in a cruel hunter's trap, was a magnificent golden eagle, its wing badly injured and its fierce eyes filled with pain. Most men would have ridden past, but Tom saw something in that bird's gaze that he couldn't ignore. He carefully freed the eagle from the trap and took it back to his modest ranch, not knowing this simple act of mercy would lead to an extraordinary bond. Over the following weeks, Tom nursed the wounded eagle back to health, watching as the proud creature slowly learned to trust him. But just as the eagle was ready to return to the wild, a devastating storm threatened everything Tom held dear. Would the bond between man and bird prove strong enough to save them both? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun cast long shadows across the high desert of New Mexico Territory as Thomas Riley guided his chestnut mare, Buck, along the dusty trail toward home. At 45, Tom carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had weathered life's storms and emerged stronger, though perhaps more solitary. His weathered hands, scarred from years of ranch work, held the reins with gentle authority, while his pale blue eyes scanned the endless expanse of sage, brush, and red earth that had become both his sanctuary and his prison. 3 years had passed since Sarah's death, and the small ranch nestled in the valley below still felt too empty without her laughter echoing from the kitchen window. Tom had built that 2-room adobe house with his own hands back in 1875, dreaming of the children who would fill its rooms with joy. But tuberculosis had claimed Sarah before those dreams could take root, leaving Tom to tend the modest spread of cattle and horses with only Buck for companionship and the wind through the cottonwoods for conversation. The ranch sat 15 miles south of Santa Fe, far enough from town to discourage casual visitors, but close enough for Tom to make the weekly trip for supplies and news. He preferred it that way. The isolation suited his temperament these days, though it hadn't always been so. Sarah used to tease him about his social nature, how he could strike up a conversation with anyone at the general store or church social. Now those same neighbors who once sought his counsel and enjoyed his company understood to give him space, recognizing the deep grief that had settled over him like morning fog that never quite lifted. His leather-bound journal, wrapped in oilcloth and tucked safely in his saddlebags, contained 3 years' worth of entries written by lamplight at the kitchen table. Sarah had helped him sand smooth. Every evening without fail, Tom recorded the day's events in his careful script, the number of cattle counted, repairs made to fencing, weather observations, and sometimes, when the loneliness pressed too heavy on his chest, memories of Sarah that he feared time might steal away. The journal had become his confessional, his companion, and his promise to keep living even when living felt like too much effort. "Easy there, Buck," Tom murmured, as his horse stepped carefully around a cluster of prickly pear cactus blooming with brilliant yellow flowers. The mare's ears twitched at his voice, and she settled into her steady walking pace. Tom had raised Buck from a foal, training her with patience and kindness until she responded to the slightest touch of his heels or shift in his weight. They understood each other without words, a partnership born of mutual respect and countless hours working together under the vast New Mexico sky. The town of Santa Fe buzzed with territorial politics and railroad talk, but Tom paid little attention to such grand schemes. His world had shrunk to the boundaries of his ranch, the weekly trips to town, and the routine of caring for his animals. Doc Martinez, a kind Mexican physician who had tended Sarah during her final months, still inquired about Tom's health and state of mind whenever their paths crossed. Sheriff Wade Thompson, a former cavalry officer who had served alongside Tom during the war, made a point of checking on him during his patrols through the county. Both men worried about Tom's increasing solitude, though they respected his need to grieve in his own way. Doc Martinez had gently suggested that Tom might consider taking on a hired hand, or perhaps courting one of the respectable widows in town, but Tom had politely declined such suggestions. He wasn't ready to share his space or his heart with anyone new. The ranch, with its memories embedded in every adobe brick and fence post, remained sacred to his life with Sarah. The cattle operation, though small, provided enough income to maintain his simple lifestyle. Tom ran about 50 head of hardy longhorn crossbreeds that thrived in the arid climate, selling steers twice a year to buyers who appreciated his reputation for honest dealing and well-cared-for livestock. His horses, a mixed herd of Mustang crosses and more refined stock, found ready buyers among ranchers and the occasional cavalry remount officer. Tom had a gift with horses, understanding their nature in a way that bordered on mystical to those who watched him work. The adobe house itself reflected Tom's practical nature and his memories of Sarah. The main room served as kitchen, dining area, and sitting room, with a large stone fireplace that Sarah had insisted upon for the cold winter nights. Their bedroom remained exactly as she had left it, her brush still on the dresser, her favorite shawl draped over the rocking chair by the window where she used to sit and watch for Tom's return from the range. He slept now in the smaller room that had been intended for their first child, unable to disturb the shrine he had unconsciously created to their life together. Outside, the barn and corrals stood in good repair, painted with whitewash every spring, as Sarah had liked. She had possessed strong opinions about maintaining their property's appearance, believing that how a person cared for their home reflected their character. Tom honored her memory by keeping everything as neat and orderly as she would have expected, though some evenings the effort exhausted him more than a full day of hard physical labor. The desert landscape that surrounded their valley held an austere beauty that never failed to move Tom, even in his darkest moods. Massive mesas rose like ancient monuments against the endless blue sky, their red sandstone faces changing color with the angle of the sun throughout the day. Pinyon pines dotted the higher elevations, while desert willows and cottonwoods marked the path of seasonal streams. In spring, the desert exploded with wildflowers, Indian paintbrush, desert lupine, and ghost flowers that bloomed only at night, filling the air with sweet fragrance. Wildlife moved through Tom's valley in predictable patterns. Mule deer came down to drink from his stock tank at dawn and dusk. Coyotes called to each other across the mesas on moonlit nights. Hawks and buzzards rode the thermals high above, while roadrunners darted between the sagebrush chasing lizards. Tom had learned to read these patterns like a book, understanding which animals indicated changing weather or the presence of predators. This knowledge had served him well during his years alone, providing both practical information and a sense of connection to the living world around him. His relationship with his neighbors remained cordial but distant. The Hendersons, who ran a larger spread to the east, occasionally offered to help with roundups or barn raisings, but Tom rarely accepted such assistance. He preferred to handle his own work, finding solace in the physical demands of ranch life. The widow Martinez, no relation to Doc Martinez, had made subtle overtures about sharing Sunday dinners or attending church socials together, but Tom had gently discouraged such possibilities without giving offense. As Buck picked her way along the familiar trail, Tom's thoughts turned to the supplies he carried in his saddlebags: coffee, flour, salt, a few pieces of hard candy that reminded him of treats Sarah used to enjoy. The routine of these weekly trips anchored his weeks, providing structure to days that might otherwise blur together in an endless cycle of solitary work and quiet evenings. Soon he would unsaddle Buck, tend to his other animals, and settle into another evening with his journal and his memories, unaware that this particular homeward journey would alter the course of his carefully ordered life in ways he could never have imagined. The first thing Tom noticed was the sound, a harsh cry that cut through the afternoon stillness like a blade drawn across stone. Buck's ears swiveled forward, and the mare slowed her pace without being asked, sensing something amiss in the familiar landscape. Tom straightened in his saddle, scanning the terrain ahead, where the trail curved around a massive boulder formation that rose from the desert floor, like the ruins of some ancient cathedral. There it was again, that desperate cry, weaker now but unmistakably the call of a bird in distress. Tom had spent enough years in the wilderness to recognize the difference between normal wildlife sounds and the unmistakable voice of suffering. Buck snorted softly and tossed her head, picking up on Tom's heightened attention. He urged her forward with a gentle touch of his heels, following the sound around the bend in the trail. What he saw made him pull Buck to an immediate halt, his heart clenching with a mixture of anger and sorrow that surprised him with its intensity. There, perhaps 30 yards off the main trail, among a cluster of juniper trees, a magnificent golden eagle struggled against the cruel embrace of a wire snare. The trap had been cunningly placed near what appeared to be the remains of a rabbit kill, and the eagle's fierce hunger had led it directly into the hunter's device. Tom dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and calm, despite the fury building in his chest. The eagle was a fully mature bird, its wingspan easily 7 feet when extended, with the rich golden-brown plumage that gave the species its name, gleaming dully in the afternoon light. One powerful wing beat frantically against the wire that held it fast, while the other hung at an unnatural angle, clearly damaged by the bird's desperate attempts to free itself. Blood stained the golden feathers where the wire had cut deep, and the eagle's fierce yellow eyes blazed with pain and defiant rage. As Tom approached, the eagle fixed him with that piercing gaze, and he felt something pass between them, a moment of recognition perhaps, or simply the acknowledgement of one wild thing by another. The bird did not increase its struggles at his approach, but seemed to assess him with an intelligence that bordered on human. Tom had encountered golden eagles before, during his years on the frontier, but never at such close range, and never under such circumstances. "Easy there, friend," Tom murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not here to hurt you." The eagle's head tilted slightly, and Tom could swear the magnificent creature understood his intention, if not his words. He knelt slowly beside the trap, studying the configuration of wires and springs that held the bird captive. It was a cruel device, designed to tighten with each movement, slowly strangling or crushing whatever creature was unfortunate enough to trigger its mechanism. The craftsmanship was expert, but heartless, the work of someone who viewed wildlife as nothing more than a source of feathers and meat for market. Tom pulled his knife from his belt, a sturdy blade his father had given him years ago, and began the delicate process of cutting the wires without further injuring the eagle. The bird watched his every movement, occasionally uttering a low sound that might have been a warning or simply an expression of pain. Tom worked with infinite patience, sawing through each strand of wire while murmuring constant reassurance to his unlikely patient. "That's it, just hold still now. I know it hurts, but we'll have you free in just a moment." The damaged wing proved to be the most challenging aspect of the rescue. The wire had wrapped around the joint where wing met body, and the eagle's struggles had pulled it tight enough to cut through feathers and into the flesh beneath. Tom could see bone through the wound, and his experience treating injured livestock told him this was a serious injury that might never heal properly in the wild. As he worked, a single golden feather drifted free from the eagle's damaged wing, catching the afternoon breeze and settling on the ground beside Tom's knee. He paused in his cutting to pick it up, struck by its perfect beauty, the way the light seemed to live within its golden surface, the precise construction of barb and barbule that allowed flight. This feather represented everything. The eagle was freedom, power, grace, and seeing it separated from its owner by violence and cruelty stirred emotions in Tom that had lain dormant for too long. The last wire parted with a sharp snap, and the eagle was suddenly free. Tom expected the bird to immediately attempt flight, but instead it simply stood there, testing its damaged wing with careful movements while never taking its eyes from his face. The wing clearly would not support the bird's weight. The injury was too severe for immediate flight, but the eagle's spirit remained unbroken. Tom sat back on his heels, considering his options. The right thing, the sensible thing, would be to leave the eagle here and let nature take its course. A wild creature belonged in the wild, and interfering with natural processes rarely ended well for either animal or human. But as he looked into those fierce yellow eyes, Tom found himself remembering Sarah's gentle hands, caring for injured animals they had found. Over the years, baby rabbits fallen from nests, cats hurt by coyotes, once even a young deer with a broken leg that she had nursed back to health in their barn. What would she do? He asked himself, knowing the answer even as he spoke the words aloud. The decision made itself. Tom carefully removed his jacket and spread it on the ground beside the eagle. The bird eyed the garment suspiciously but did not retreat as Tom slowly, gently coaxed it to step onto the makeshift stretcher. The eagle was heavier than he had expected, its body dense with the muscle required for soaring flight, and he could feel the bird's rapid heartbeat through the layers of fabric. "Buck's going to love this," Tom muttered, as he approached his horse with his unusual burden. The mare rolled her eyes and sidled nervously, but her trust in Tom overcame her instinct to flee from the predator he carried. Tom managed to secure the eagle in front of his saddle, wrapping his jacket around the bird to keep it calm and prevent further injury to the damaged wing. The ride home seemed to take forever. Tom kept Buck to a careful walk, mindful of his passenger's condition and the stress that the eagle must be experiencing. The bird remained remarkably still during the journey, perhaps understanding that cooperation offered its best chance for survival, or perhaps simply exhausted by pain and the morning's ordeal. As they approached the ranch, Tom's mind raced ahead to the practical considerations of caring for a wild eagle. He would need to set up some kind of enclosure, find appropriate food, and somehow treat that damaged wing without getting himself torn apart by talons designed to kill prey much larger than rabbits. The eagle's feet, he had noticed, were formidable weapons, each toe ending in a curved black talon as sharp as any knife blade. But beneath these practical concerns lay something deeper, a stirring of purpose that Tom had not felt since Sarah's death. For 3 years he had been going through the motions of living, caring for his ranch and animals with competent efficiency, but no real engagement. Now, faced with this creature's desperate need, he felt something awakening in himself, a sense that perhaps there was still room in his life for hope and healing, even if it came in the most unexpected form. The eagle shifted slightly in his arms as they reached the barn, and Tom looked down to meet that fierce, golden gaze once more. In those eyes, he saw his own reflection, and perhaps something more, the possibility that healing might be a gift they could give each other. Tom converted the old feed room at the back of the barn into a makeshift recovery ward, spreading fresh straw thick on the floor and positioning wooden crates to create a sheltered corner where the eagle could rest without feeling exposed. The bird had allowed itself to be placed in this sanctuary with surprising docility, perhaps sensing that its survival depended on accepting help from this strange, gentle giant who spoke in soothing tones and moved without threatening gestures. The first challenge came with treating the wing injury. Tom had dealt with wounded livestock before, but nothing had prepared him for the delicate precision required to clean and dress wounds on a creature whose natural instinct was to defend itself with razor-sharp talons. He found himself thinking of Sarah and the calm patience she had shown when nursing sick animals back to health during their years together. Sarah's medicine kit still sat on the shelf in their bedroom, a small wooden box lined with faded blue fabric that contained the remedies she had collected over the years: tincture of iodine, rolls of clean cotton bandaging, small bottles of laudanum for pain, and packets of herbs she had dried herself. Tom had not touched the kit since her death, but now he carried it to the barn with reverent hands, knowing she would have wanted her healing supplies used for this purpose. "She always said every creature deserves a chance," Tom murmured to the eagle as he knelt beside the bird with Sarah's medical supplies arranged on a clean cloth. The eagle watched him with those intense yellow eyes, its head tilted in what seemed like curious attention to his words. Cleaning the wing wound proved to be a test of patience for both patient and caretaker. The eagle endured Tom's ministrations with stoic dignity, occasionally uttering a soft sound that might have been protest or simply acknowledgement of discomfort. Tom worked slowly, using Sarah's gentle techniques to flush debris from the cuts where the wire had bitten deep, then applying iodine with careful dabs of cotton. The wing itself presented a more complex challenge. Tom could see that several feathers were broken beyond repair, and the joint where wing met body showed considerable swelling and discoloration. He fashioned a loose support bandage using strips of cotton, immobilizing the wing against the eagle's body to prevent further damage while allowing for natural healing processes to begin. "There now," Tom said softly as he finished his work. "That should help some." The eagle studied its bandaged wing with what appeared to be curiosity rather than distress, flexing its good wing experimentally as if testing the new limitations imposed by injury and treatment. Tom found himself impressed by the bird's adaptability and apparent intelligence. This was clearly a creature accustomed to solving problems and adjusting to changing circumstances. Feeding presented the next hurdle. Tom knew that golden eagles were primarily hunters of small game rabbits, prairie dogs, ground squirrels, and occasional fish when available. He had no fresh game on hand, but his smokehouse contained strips of jerked beef that he hoped might serve as temporary sustenance. He cut the dried meat into small pieces and offered them to the eagle on a wooden plate, unsure whether the bird would accept food from human hands. To his surprise, the eagle approached the offered meal after only a brief hesitation, using its powerful beak to tear the jerky into manageable pieces. The bird ate with careful dignity, pausing between bites to study Tom as if assessing this strange provider. When the meal was finished, the eagle retreated to its sheltered corner but continued to watch Tom with alert interest. Over the following days, a routine developed. Tom would arrive at the barn each morning with fresh water and food, spending time quietly talking to the eagle while cleaning its quarters and checking the progress of its healing wing. The bird seemed to anticipate these visits, positioning itself near the gate of its makeshift pen and greeting Tom with a soft sound that began to resemble recognition. Doc Martinez arrived on the fourth day, ostensibly to check on Tom's health, but clearly curious about reports from neighbors who had seen him carrying supplies to and from the barn at unusual hours. The elderly physician, whose kind eyes and gentle manner had made him a trusted friend during Sarah's illness, knocked on the barn door with the persistence of a man accustomed to overcoming patient reluctance. "Tom, my friend, open this door. I have heard interesting stories about your recent activities." Tom emerged from the feed room with straw in his hair and the satisfied expression of a man who had just witnessed encouraging progress in his patient's recovery. The eagle had begun testing its injured wing with small movements, and the swelling appeared to be diminishing under his careful care. "Doc, what brings you out this way?" "Reports of a hermit rancher who has taken to spending his days in deep conversation with mysterious creatures," Doc Martinez replied, with the gentle humor that had made him beloved throughout the territory. "Maria Gonzalez mentioned seeing you carrying what looked like medical supplies to your barn, and you know how such things stimulate curiosity." Tom found himself torn between his natural inclination toward privacy and a surprising desire to share his unusual patient with someone who might understand the significance of what was happening in his barn. Doc Martinez had proven himself a trustworthy friend during the darkest days of Sarah's illness, never judging Tom's grief or offering empty consolations. "Come see for yourself," Tom said finally, opening the feed room door to reveal the golden eagle standing alertly in its recovery area. Doc Martinez stepped into the doorway and froze, his weathered face reflecting amazement and professional interest. The eagle regarded this new visitor with calm assessment, showing none of the agitation Tom had expected at the introduction of a stranger. "Magnificent," the doctor breathed. "Absolutely magnificent. How long have you been caring for this creature?" Tom explained the circumstances of finding the eagle trapped and his decision to attempt healing the injured wing. Doc Martinez listened without comment, but Tom could see the older man's mind working, perhaps recognizing something in Tom's animated description that had been missing from his demeanor for years. "And the bird accepts your care?" "Seems to. Can't say I understand it myself, but we've reached some kind of understanding." Doc Martinez studied the eagle for several more minutes, noting the careful bandaging and the bird's healthy appearance despite its injury. When he finally turned back to Tom, his expression held a mixture of approval and gentle concern. "Birds of prey are not known for their tolerance of human intervention, Tom. The fact that this eagle accepts your care suggests either desperation or recognition of your intentions, perhaps both. You think I'm wasting my time? On the contrary, my friend. I think this eagle may be exactly what you needed, though I suspect you needed it more than it needed you." By the second week, Tom had crafted a proper perch for the eagle, using seasoned oak from his woodshed, carving smooth grooves for the bird's talons, and positioning it at a height that allowed the eagle to survey its temporary domain with appropriate dignity. The project had occupied his evening hours for 3 days, his hands remembering skills learned from his father years ago, and he found unexpected satisfaction in creating something beautiful and functional for his unusual guest. The eagle had taken to the perch immediately, spending hours there in a state of alert repose that Tom had come to recognize as the bird's natural way of conserving energy while remaining aware of its surroundings. From this vantage point, the eagle could observe Tom's daily activities, the feeding of horses and cattle, the repair of equipment, the endless small tasks that defined ranch life, and Tom often felt those piercing yellow eyes following his movements with what seemed like genuine interest. "You're quite the supervisor," Tom remarked one morning as he pitched hay to his horses while the eagle watched from its perch. "Got opinions about how I should be doing this, I'd wager." The eagle cocked its head at the sound of Tom's voice, and Tom could swear he detected something like amusement in the bird's expression. Over the past weeks, he had begun talking to the eagle regularly, sharing observations about the weather, memories of life with Sarah, even his concerns about ranch business. The bird proved to be an excellent listener, never interrupting or offering unwanted advice, simply maintaining that steady, intelligent attention that somehow made Tom feel less alone than he had in months. The wing showed remarkable improvement under Tom's dedicated care. The swelling had receded completely, and new feathers were beginning to emerge where the damaged ones had been carefully removed. Tom had taken to removing the support bandage for increasingly longer periods each day, allowing the eagle to test its healing wing with small stretches and gentle movements. During one of these exercises, Tom noticed the eagle attempting short hops between the perch and the floor of its quarters, clearly testing the wing's ability to support brief moments of flight. The movements were tentative at first, but grew more confident as the bird rediscovered its physical capabilities. Tom found himself holding his breath during these trials, sharing the eagle's careful optimism about the return of its most essential ability. The bond between man and bird deepened in ways that surprised them both. Tom had begun to recognize subtle changes in the eagle's posture and sounds that indicated mood, comfort level, and physical condition. The bird seemed equally attuned to Tom's emotional state, remaining calmly alert on his good days, but becoming more actively attentive when grief or loneliness weighed heavily on his spirits. It was during one of these darker moments, when memories of Sarah had left Tom sitting silently in the eagle's quarters, with tears threatening to overwhelm him, that the bird did something unprecedented. The eagle left its perch and approached Tom directly, settling on the straw beside him and fixing him with that steady, golden gaze that seemed to offer wordless comfort. "She would have loved you," Tom whispered, his voice rough with emotion. Sarah had a way with wild things, always said they could sense a person's true nature better than most humans could. The eagle remained beside him for nearly an hour that afternoon, a companionable presence that somehow made the weight of loss feel less crushing. When Tom finally rose to continue his ranch work, the bird returned to its perch without fuss, but something had changed between them, a deeper understanding that transcended the simple relationship between caretaker and patient. Not everyone approved of Tom's growing attachment to the eagle. Jake Henderson, whose ranch bordered Tom's to the east, made a point of stopping by one afternoon with questions that barely concealed his disapproval of what he viewed as Tom's eccentric behavior. "Heard you're keeping some kind of bird out here," Henderson said without preamble, his weathered face set in lines of skeptical concern. "Folks in town are talking." Tom continued brushing Buck while considering his response. Henderson meant well, but his practical nature had little room for the kind of emotional healing that Tom was experiencing through his care of the eagle. Birds healing from injuries, don't see the harm in that. Wild creatures belong in the wild, Tom. You're not doing that eagle any favors by making it dependent on human care. Tom set down his brush and turned to face his neighbor fully. Henderson was a good man, but his worldview divided everything into categories of useful and useless, practical and impractical, with little appreciation for the gray areas where healing and hope might flourish. Eagle's not dependent on anything except time to heal properly. When it's ready to leave, it'll leave. Henderson studied Tom's face, perhaps recognizing something in his expression that warned against pressing the subject further. Just saying you might want to consider what happens when you get too attached to something that was never meant to stay. After Henderson left, Tom found himself troubled by the man's words despite his initial dismissal of them. The eagle was indeed a wild creature, and its ultimate destiny lay in the vast skies above the desert, not in the comfortable confines of a ranch barn. But the prospect of releasing the bird had become more complex than simply opening a door and wishing it well. That evening, Tom sat in the eagle's quarters with his journal, recording his observations about the bird's progress while working through his own conflicted feelings about their relationship. The eagle watched him write, occasionally uttering soft sounds that Tom had learned to interpret as expressions of contentment or mild curiosity. "You've got me thinking in circles," Tom admitted to his feathered companion. "Part of me wants to keep you here forever, safe and cared for. But I know that's not what you need, and it's probably not what I need either." The eagle tilted its head, fixing Tom with that intense stare that always made him feel as though the bird understood far more than should be possible. In the lamplight, the golden feathers seemed to glow with inner fire, and Tom was struck again by the magnificent wildness of the creature he had taken into his care. As he wrote in his journal that night, documenting the eagle's continued recovery and his own growing awareness of the approaching day when they would have to part, Tom realized that Henderson's warning had contained an unintended truth. He was becoming attached to the eagle, but perhaps that attachment was exactly what both of them needed, a bridge between the isolated grief that had defined his recent years and whatever lay waiting beyond the careful boundaries of his solitary existence. The third week brought remarkable changes to the eagle's condition and behavior. The damaged wing had healed to the point where the bird could achieve sustained flight within the confines of the barn, soaring from perch to rafter with increasing confidence and grace. Tom had enlarged the eagle's living space, opening the feed room into the main barn area to provide more room for these practice flights. And he spent long minutes each day simply watching the magnificent creature rediscover its aerial abilities. During these flight sessions, Tom felt something approaching awe as he witnessed the eagle's natural mastery of movement through three-dimensional space. The bird's wings, fully extended, created shadows that swept across the barn floor like passing clouds, and the soft whisper of feathers cutting through air became a sound Tom associated with hope and healing. Yet beneath his admiration, lay a growing recognition that each successful flight brought them closer to the inevitable moment of separation. The eagle had grown comfortable enough with Tom's presence to allow him to sit quietly in the barn during these practice sessions, and Tom found himself spending entire afternoons there, sometimes reading from his journal, sometimes simply enjoying the companionable silence broken only by the gentle sounds of wings and the occasional soft call from his feathered friend. He had begun to think of the bird as Gabriel, though he had not spoken the name aloud, somehow feeling that naming the eagle might make their eventual parting even more difficult. Weather patterns across the territory had begun to shift toward the violent extremes that characterized late summer in the high desert. The morning air carried hints of distant storms, and Tom's barometer showed the kind of pressure drops that typically preceded the massive thunderstorms that could turn arroyos into torrents and flatten anything not substantial enough to withstand their fury. A telegraph message from the territorial weather station in Santa Fe had arrived with his weekly mail, warning of severe weather systems moving in from the southwest. Tom studied the weather warning with growing concern, not just for his ranch and livestock, but for the timing of Gabriel's recovery. The eagle was clearly ready for release. Its wing had regained full strength and flexibility, its appetite had returned to normal levels, and its behavior showed increasing signs of restlessness that Tom recognized as the bird's natural desire to return to its wild territory. But releasing Gabriel into the path of approaching storms would be tantamount to condemning the bird to almost certain death. The internal conflict this created troubled Tom more than he cared to admit. Part of him was relieved to have a legitimate reason to delay Gabriel's release, but his conscience nagged at him with the knowledge that his reluctance to let go was influenced as much by his own emotional attachment as by concern for the eagle's safety. He had grown accustomed to having a purpose beyond the routine maintenance of his ranch, and the prospect of returning to his previous solitary existence felt suddenly unbearable. Gabriel seemed to sense Tom's inner turmoil. The eagle had begun exhibiting behaviors that Tom interpreted as gentle challenges to his authority, perching near open barn doors and gazing longingly at the sky beyond, calling out in response to the cries of wild eagles passing overhead and showing increasing restlessness during the evening hours when wild raptors typically began their hunting activities. "You want to go, don't you?" Tom said one evening as he sat on a hay bale watching Gabriel pace back and forth along a high rafter. The eagle paused in its movements and fixed Tom with that penetrating stare, and Tom felt certain he saw understanding in those golden eyes. The question of release had become further complicated by Tom's growing realization that his care for Gabriel had awakened emotions and needs in himself that he had thought permanently buried with Sarah. The daily routine of caring for another living thing, the satisfaction of nurturing something back to health, the simple comfort of companionship, even the wordless companionship of a wild bird, had reminded him of aspects of himself that had been dormant during his years of grief-imposed isolation. He found himself thinking about Sarah differently now, remembering not just the devastating loss of her death, but the joy and purpose their life together had brought him. Gabriel's presence had somehow given him permission to access those positive memories without being overwhelmed by the pain of loss, and he began to understand that healing might be possible even for wounds as deep as the one carved by Sarah's death. One afternoon, while Tom was repairing a section of corral fencing damaged by his restless cattle, Gabriel surprised him by leaving the barn entirely and perching on the corner post of the corral where Tom was working. The eagle had never ventured so far from its sanctuary, and Tom froze in place, uncertain whether this represented progress or the beginning of Gabriel's natural departure. The bird remained on the fence post for nearly an hour, watching Tom work with apparent interest while periodically scanning the horizon with the alert attention of a creature reacquainting itself with the vast world beyond the barn. When Tom moved to a different section of fence, Gabriel followed, hopping from post to post with casual ease, maintaining his supervisory position throughout the afternoon's work. "So now you're a foreman," Tom observed with amusement, noting how Gabriel seemed to inspect each repair with the critical eye of an experienced ranch hand. The eagle cocked its head at Tom's voice, and Tom could swear he detected something like humor in the bird's expression. That evening brought an unexpected visitor in the form of Sheriff Wade Thompson, whose weathered face and formal bearing could not entirely conceal his genuine concern for Tom's well-being. Thompson dismounted from his bay gelding with the careful movements of a man whose back bore the accumulated aches of too many years in the saddle, and his eyes immediately noted Gabriel's presence on the corral fence. "Evening, Tom. Heard interesting reports about your recent activities." Tom set down his tools and wiped his hands on his work shirt, recognizing in Thompson's tone the careful neutrality of a lawman investigating something that might or might not require official attention. The two men had served together during the war, and their friendship was built on mutual respect and shared experiences that needed no explanation. "Evening, Wade. What kind of reports?" Thompson nodded toward Gabriel, who regarded the sheriff with calm interest but showed no inclination to retreat. "Reports of a man keeping dangerous wildlife on his property without proper permits or containment." Tom felt a flash of anger at the implication that Gabriel represented any kind of threat, but he recognized Thompson's position and the political pressures that must have prompted this visit. Someone had complained, probably Henderson or one of the other neighbors who viewed Tom's attachment to the eagle as evidence of declining mental stability. "Bird's been healing from injuries, haven't been keeping it against its will." "I can see that," Thompson replied, studying Gabriel with the appreciative eye of a man who understood both wildlife and the law. "Question is whether you've got proper authority to rehabilitate wild eagles. Territorial government's been cracking down on people who take in protected species." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with Thompson explaining the bureaucratic requirements for wildlife rehabilitation while making it clear that his personal opinion differed significantly from the official position he was required to represent. Eventually, they reached an understanding that Gabriel's release would occur within the next few days, weather permitting, and that no formal charges would be filed, provided the situation was resolved promptly. After Thompson departed, Tom sat in the barn with Gabriel perched nearby, contemplating the strange turns his life had taken over the past month. The eagle had brought him unexpected joy and renewed purpose, but it had also forced him to confront the reality that healing and growth required risk, the risk of caring for something that could be lost, the risk of opening his heart to new possibilities, the risk of moving beyond the familiar boundaries of grief into whatever uncertain territory lay ahead. As if sensing his thoughts, Gabriel moved closer and fixed him with that steady, golden gaze that had become such a source of comfort over their weeks together. In those eyes, Tom saw reflected not just his own need for companionship, but the wild, untamed spirit that belonged to the vast sky and endless desert beyond the safe confines of the ranch. Tomorrow, or the next day, or whenever the weather cleared, he would have to find the courage to open the barn door and watch Gabriel disappear into the distance, carrying with him whatever healing they had given each other during their brief time together. The fourth week brought Gabriel to full recovery, and Tom could no longer deny the evidence before his eyes. The eagle's wing showed no signs of weakness or limitation. Its appetite had stabilized at the robust level of a healthy wild raptor, and its behavior demonstrated increasing urgency to return to its natural territory. Gabriel had begun calling to wild eagles that passed overhead, receiving answering cries that seemed to pull at something deep in the bird's genetic memory of freedom and flight. Tom's internal struggle intensified as the day of release approached. He had spent the previous evening sitting in his kitchen, turning Sarah's wedding ring between his fingers as he contemplated the strange parallels between losing his wife and preparing to say goodbye to Gabriel. The ring, which he had worn on a chain around his neck since Sarah's death, felt heavier than usual, weighted with the accumulated grief of 3 years and the new understanding that holding on to things, whether memories, objects, or living creatures, could become a prison for both the holder and the held. Gabriel seemed to sense the approaching transition with an awareness that bordered on mystical. The eagle had taken to spending long periods perched near the barn's main entrance, gazing out at the desert landscape with an intensity that spoke of deep longing. When Tom approached during these vigils, Gabriel would turn that piercing stare on him with what felt like a combination of gratitude and gentle reproach, as if the bird understood Tom's reluctance but expected better from his human friend. The weather forecast continued to promise severe storms, but the immediate conditions had stabilized enough to make release possible, if not entirely ideal. Tom had been monitoring the territorial weather reports with obsessive attention, looking for any excuse to delay the inevitable while knowing that each day of delay served his own emotional needs more than Gabriel's physical requirements. On a clear morning when the desert air held the crisp promise of autumn, Tom made his decision. He could no longer justify keeping Gabriel confined based on weather concerns, and the eagle's increasingly restless behavior made it clear that continued captivity was causing more stress than the risks of freedom. It was time to honor the trust Gabriel had placed in him during their weeks together by giving the bird what it needed most, the chance to reclaim its wild life. Tom spent the morning preparing for the release ceremony he had envisioned, though he had shared his plans with no one. He selected a location on the highest point of his property, a rocky outcropping that provided an expansive view of the valley and the mesas beyond. From this vantage point, Gabriel would be able to orient himself to the familiar landmarks that would guide him back to his natural territory. The process of moving Gabriel from the barn to the release site proved surprisingly emotional for both participants. Tom had fashioned a simple carrying perch that would allow Gabriel to ride comfortably while maintaining his dignity, but the eagle seemed to understand the significance of the journey. Instead of the calm acceptance that had characterized their previous interactions, Gabriel showed signs of nervous energy, shifting his weight frequently, calling softly, and scanning the horizon with obvious anticipation. As they climbed the winding path to the rocky outcropping, Tom found himself remembering the day he had discovered Gabriel trapped and injured, and marveling at the changes that had occurred in both of them since that moment. The eagle had regained not just his physical health, but his confidence and wild instincts, while Tom had discovered that his capacity for love and connection had not died with Sarah, but had simply been waiting for the right opportunity to reawaken. At the release site, Tom set the perch on a flat boulder and stepped back to give Gabriel space to make his own decision about departure. The eagle immediately took advantage of his freedom, spreading his wings wide and testing the air currents that swirled around the elevated position. For a moment, Tom thought Gabriel might launch himself immediately into flight, but instead, the bird turned to face him with that steady, intelligent gaze that had become so familiar over their weeks together. What happened next surprised Tom with its intensity. Gabriel approached him directly, something the eagle had never done in an outdoor setting, and settled on the ground at Tom's feet. For several long minutes, bird and man regarded each other in silence, and Tom felt a profound sense of communication passing between them, not words, but something deeper than language, an acknowledgement of the gift they had given each other. "I'll miss you," Tom said quietly, his voice rough with emotion he had not expected to feel so acutely. Gabriel cocked his head and uttered a soft sound that Tom chose to interpret as understanding and farewell. Then, without warning, Gabriel launched himself into the air with powerful wing beats that carried him up and away from the outcropping in a magnificent display of recovered strength and grace. Tom watched the eagle climb higher and higher, becoming a distant speck against the vast blue sky, until finally Gabriel disappeared entirely into the immensity of the desert landscape. Tom remained on the outcropping for a long time after Gabriel vanished, processing the complex emotions that accompanied this moment of triumph and loss. The eagle's successful return to the wild represented everything Tom had hoped to accomplish, but the sudden absence of Gabriel's presence left him feeling hollow in ways he had not anticipated. As he finally turned to make his way back down the mountain path, Tom pulled Sarah's wedding ring from the chain around his neck and held it up to catch the afternoon light. The simple gold band gleamed in the sunshine, beautiful and precious, but no longer the anchor that had kept him tethered to grief and isolation. With careful deliberation, Tom removed the ring from its chain and slipped it onto his finger for the first time since Sarah's death, not as a symbol of clinging to the past, but as a celebration of love's capacity to transform and renew itself in unexpected ways. Gabriel had taught him that healing did not require forgetting, and that opening his heart to new forms of love and connection honored, rather than betrayed, the memory of what he had lost. As Tom walked home through the lengthening shadows, he carried with him the understanding that his time with Gabriel had prepared him for whatever opportunities for growth and connection might lie ahead, even if he could not yet imagine what forms they might take. The storm arrived 3 days earlier than predicted, rolling across the desert like a living thing bent on destruction. Tom had awakened before dawn to the ominous sound of wind building strength among the cottonwoods, and his barometer confirmed what his weather-trained instincts already knew. This would be no ordinary thunderstorm, but one of those rare, devastating tempests that could reshape the landscape and claim the lives of anything caught unprepared in its path. By mid-morning, the wind had reached dangerous velocities, and Tom found himself struggling to secure his ranch against the approaching fury. His cattle had already sought shelter in the natural lee of rock formations, their animal instincts superior to human weather forecasting, but his horses needed to be brought into the barn where they would be protected from flying debris and potential structural collapse. As he led the last of his horses across the yard, a movement in the sky caught his attention. High above the ranch, fighting against winds that should have made flight impossible, Gabriel struggled to make his way toward the barn. The eagle's magnificent flying abilities were no match for the chaotic air currents that preceded the storm, and Tom watched in horror as Gabriel was repeatedly battered by gusts that sent him tumbling across the sky like a leaf in a hurricane. Tom's heart clenched as he realized what was happening. Gabriel had not simply returned to visit his former refuge. The eagle was seeking shelter from a storm that threatened to destroy everything in its path. The bird's wild instincts had brought him back to the one place where he had found safety and care, and Tom felt a surge of protective emotion that surprised him with its intensity. But as Tom struggled to reach the barn himself, fighting against wind that threatened to knock him off his feet, the broken ranch gate, its latch mechanism damaged by the storm's early fury, swung wide open with a crash that echoed like gunfire across the valley. Through that gap rode 3 men on lathered horses, their faces masked by bandanas and their weapons drawn with the casual efficiency of experienced criminals. The leader, a lean man with cold eyes and a scarred face that spoke of violence both given and received, surveyed Tom's property with obvious satisfaction. Behind him rode 2 younger men whose nervous energy and frequent glances at their leader marked them as followers rather than initiators, dangerous but lacking the focused malevolence that radiated from their commander. "Well, well," the leader called out over the rising wind, his voice carrying the harsh accent of the Texas borderlands. "Looks like we found ourselves some shelter, boys, and a helpful local to make sure we're comfortable." Tom recognized the type immediately outlaws fleeing justice, probably from a failed robbery or worse, seeking refuge from both the law and the storm that would make pursuit impossible for days. His military experience during the war had taught him to assess threats quickly, and everything about these men screamed imminent danger to anyone who crossed their path. The leader dismounted and approached Tom with the swagger of a man accustomed to intimidating others into submission. His gun remained holstered, but his hand rested casually on its grip, a gesture designed to communicate threat without requiring actual violence yet. "Name's Jake Morrison," the man said with mock politeness. "These are my associates, Billy and Frank. We're going to be your guests for a spell, old man, at least until this blow passes over. Hope you don't mind the company." Tom's mind raced through his limited options. The approaching storm made flight impossible, and his own weapons were secured in the house, while these men were armed and obviously prepared for violence. His best chance lay in appearing cooperative while looking for opportunities to gain some advantage. But the presence of Gabriel added a complication that made any plan more dangerous. High above, Gabriel had managed to reach the relative calm near the barn's roof, but the eagle's position remained precarious as the storm's full fury approached. Tom could see the bird struggling to maintain its perch against winds that seemed determined to tear everything loose from its moorings. "Mighty fine spread you got here," Morrison continued, his eyes taking inventory of Tom's property with the calculating gaze of a man assessing potential profit. "Horses look good, barns solid, should serve our needs just fine." Billy, the younger of Morrison's companions, pointed toward the barn with nervous excitement. "Boss, look at that bird up there. That's a golden eagle, ain't it? Worth good money to the right buyer." Tom felt ice form in his stomach as Morrison followed Billy's pointing finger and spotted Gabriel clinging to the barn roof. The outlaw's face lit up with the kind of predatory interest that Tom recognized as infinitely more dangerous than simple greed for horses or money. "Well, I'll be damned," Morrison said slowly. "That's one hell of a bird. Frank, you still got them leg chains in your saddlebags? Looks like we might have ourselves a bonus on this trip." The storm chose that moment to unleash its full power, sending all four men scrambling for the shelter of the barn as hail began pelting the ground with stones the size of hens' eggs. In the chaos of seeking cover, Tom managed to position himself between the outlaws and the ladder that led to the barn's loft, where Gabriel had finally found refuge from the worst of the wind. Inside the barn, Morrison's true nature revealed itself as the civilized veneer dropped away entirely. He struck Tom across the face with casual brutality, sending him stumbling against a stall door, while his companions secured the horses and began ransacking Tom's stored supplies. "Here's how this is going to work, old man," Morrison snarled, pressing the barrel of his revolver against Tom's temple. "You're going to provide us with food, shelter, and whatever else we need until this storm passes. Then you're going to help us catch that eagle up there, and after that, well, let's just say you won't be around to identify us to any territorial marshals." Tom forced himself to remain calm, despite the terror and rage that threatened to overwhelm his ability to think clearly. Gabriel was hidden in the loft above their heads, but the eagle's safety depended entirely on Tom's ability to keep these men from discovering exactly where their valuable prize had taken refuge. The storm raged around the barn with apocalyptic fury, trapping predator and prey together in a confined space where every sound echoed and every movement carried the potential for violence. Tom realized with crystal clarity that the next few hours would determine not only his own survival, but Gabriel's as well, and failure would mean the destruction of everything he had come to value in his carefully rebuilt life. The night passed with agonizing slowness, each hour marked by the relentless fury of the storm and the constant threat of violence from Tom's unwelcome guests. Morrison had positioned himself strategically near the barn's main entrance, his revolver never far from his hand, while Billy and Frank took turns maintaining watch and ransacking Tom's supplies with the methodical thoroughness of men accustomed to taking whatever they needed from those too weak to resist. Tom had been forced to sit with his back against a stall post, his hands bound with leather straps cut from his own tack, while Morrison questioned him about the ranch's resources, nearby neighbors, and most persistently, about Gabriel. The outlaw leader's interest in the eagle bordered on obsession, and Tom found himself walking a dangerous line between providing enough information to seem cooperative while revealing nothing that might make Gabriel's capture easier. "That bird's been living here how long?" Morrison demanded for the third time, his scarred face twisted with suspicion in the lamplight. Don't lie to me, old man. Wild eagles don't just hang around ranches for no reason. Bird was injured, Tom repeated, sticking to the basic truth while omitting details that might reveal the depth of his bond with Gabriel. Fixed its wing. Been hanging around since. Wild creatures do what they want. Morrison's backhand across Tom's jaw sent stars exploding across his vision, but he forced himself to show no reaction beyond the involuntary jerk of his head. Any sign of weakness would only encourage more violence, and he needed to stay alert for any opportunity to improve their situation. Above their heads, Gabriel remained hidden in the loft, but Tom could occasionally hear soft sounds that indicated the eagle's presence, the whisper of feathers against wood, the gentle scrape of talons on the barn's crossbeams. Each sound made his heart race with fear that the outlaws would notice, but the storm's constant noise provided excellent cover for Gabriel's movements. As dawn approached with no lessening of the storm's intensity, Morrison's patience began wearing thin. He had expected to be able to move on by morning, but the continued violence of the weather made travel impossible even for desperate men. His frustration manifested in increasingly erratic behavior and casual cruelty toward Tom, who bore each blow and insult with stoic endurance, while his mind worked frantically on potential escape plans. "Boss," Frank called from his position near the barn's side door, where he had been monitoring the storm's progress. "Wind's still too strong for the horses. We try to move in this, we'll lose everything to the blow." Morrison cursed viciously and kicked at a bucket, sending it clanging across the barn floor. How much longer is this supposed to last? Tom had been asking himself the same question throughout the long night. Desert storms of this magnitude typically exhausted themselves within 12 to 18 hours, but the violence of this particular tempest suggested it might be one of the rare multi-day events that could reshape the entire region. If the outlaws were trapped here for several days, the chances of maintaining Gabriel's secrecy became vanishingly small. "Usually blow themselves out by afternoon," Tom offered, hoping to encourage Morrison's impatience while buying time for some kind of plan to develop. "This one's bigger than most, though." Billy had been exploring the barn's upper reaches with the restless energy of a young man unaccustomed to confinement, and Tom's heart nearly stopped when the outlaw began climbing toward the loft where Gabriel was hidden. Tom forced himself to remain motionless, knowing that any sign of concern would immediately focus Morrison's attention on whatever Billy might discover. "Lot of room up here, boss," Billy called down. "Could hide an army in this loft. Any sign of that eagle?" "Nah, but there's nesting material. Looks like something's been living up here regular-like." Tom felt sweat break out across his forehead, despite the barn's cool temperature. Gabriel's makeshift nest, constructed from straw and cloth scraps Tom had provided during the eagle's recovery, would be obvious evidence of long-term human care if examined closely. If Billy investigated further, Gabriel's discovery would be inevitable. Morrison's eyes fixed on Tom with renewed suspicion. "Thought you said that bird just hung around sometimes. Sounds like it's been making itself at home." Before Tom could formulate a response that might deflect Morrison's growing interest, a new sound penetrated the storm's constant roar, the distant but unmistakable crack of gunfire. Morrison and his men froze, their attention immediately focused on the potential threat represented by armed men operating in the area despite the dangerous weather. "That came from the direction of the main road," Frank observed, his voice tight with nervous tension. "Could be a posse." Morrison's face went pale beneath its weathered tan. A posse brave enough to operate in storm conditions meant serious pursuit, probably federal marshals rather than local law enforcement. The kind of men who would not be deterred by weather or terrain, and who would shoot first when they finally caught up with their quarry. "How far to the road from here?" Morrison demanded, pressing his gun barrel against Tom's temple with enough force to leave an impression in his skin. Tom calculated quickly, weighing the advantages of truth against the potential for misdirection. 3 miles, maybe 4 in this weather, trails treacherous when it's wet. More gunshots echoed across the valley, closer now, and definitely moving in their direction. Morrison began pacing frantically, his earlier confidence replaced by the desperate energy of a cornered animal. His companions looked to him for leadership, but their faith in his abilities was clearly beginning to waver under the pressure of approaching justice. "We need that eagle," Morrison said suddenly, his voice carrying the manic intensity of a man whose plans were disintegrating around him. "Bird like that's worth enough to buy us safe passage to Mexico. Maybe set us up for life if we find the right buyer." Tom's blood ran cold as he realized that Morrison's desperation had elevated Gabriel from opportunistic prize to essential asset. The outlaw leader was now emotionally invested in capturing the eagle, which meant he would stop at nothing to achieve that goal. In the loft above, a soft sound indicated that Gabriel was moving, perhaps responding to the tension and raised voices below. Tom held his breath, praying that the eagle would remain hidden until some opportunity for escape presented itself. But time was running out, and the approaching gunfire meant that whatever was going to happen would happen soon. Morrison turned to Billy with sudden decision. "Get up there and find that bird. Use whatever it takes, but bring it down alive." As Billy began climbing toward Gabriel's hiding place with eager determination, Tom realized that the moment of truth had finally arrived. Within minutes, Gabriel would be discovered, and Tom would be forced to watch helplessly as the magnificent creature who had restored his faith in life's possibilities was reduced to a commodity in the hands of violent men. Unless he could find some way to turn the situation to their advantage, everything he had gained from his relationship with Gabriel would be destroyed by the very forces of cruelty and greed that had originally brought them together. Billy's boots scraped against the wooden ladder rungs as he climbed toward the loft, each step bringing him closer to Gabriel's hiding place and sealing the fate that Tom had desperately hoped to avoid. In the dim light filtering through the barn's high windows, Tom could see Morrison's scarred face, twisted with anticipation and greed. The outlaw leader's eyes fixed on the loft opening, as if he could will the golden eagle into submission through sheer force of desire. "Take your time up there, boy," Morrison called to Billy. "That bird's worth more than everything else on this ranch combined. Don't damage the merchandise." Tom's mind raced through calculations of distance, timing, and opportunity. His father's Colt revolver lay hidden beneath a loose floorboard near the barn's eastern wall, placed there years ago as insurance against exactly this kind of situation. The weapon was loaded and functional, but reaching it would require getting past Morrison and Frank, while somehow creating enough distraction to mask his movements. The odds were impossibly long, but Gabriel's discovery was now inevitable unless Tom acted immediately. The first cry that echoed from the loft was Billy's, a shout of surprise and pain that suggested Gabriel had not gone quietly into captivity. The sound was followed by a tremendous crash as something heavy hit the loft floor, then Billy's voice again, higher now and edged with fear. "Boss, this thing's fighting like a demon. It's got talons like razors." Morrison cursed and started toward the ladder, but before he could climb up to assist his subordinate, Gabriel himself appeared at the loft opening. The magnificent eagle spread his wings to their full, impressive span, his golden feathers catching what little light penetrated the storm-darkened barn, and fixed Morrison with that fierce stare that Tom knew so well. For a moment, the tableau held outlaw and eagle measuring each other across the space of the barn while the storm raged outside, and Tom held his breath in desperate hope that somehow Gabriel might escape this confrontation. Then Gabriel did something that sent shockwaves through every person present. The eagle launched himself directly at Morrison with a hunting cry that echoed through the barn like the voice of avenging justice itself. Morrison stumbled backward, raising his arms to protect his face as Gabriel's talons raked across his chest and shoulders. The outlaw's revolver discharged wildly as he fell, sending a bullet ricocheting off the barn's stone foundation, while Gabriel wheeled in the air and prepared for another attack. Frank, caught completely off guard by this turn of events, fumbled for his own weapon while trying to get a clear shot at the eagle without hitting his leader. In the chaos of Gabriel's assault, Tom saw his opportunity. Rolling sideways despite his bound hands, he managed to reach the loose floorboard and pry it up with his shoulder, exposing the hiding place where his father's Colt had waited for precisely this moment. The revolver felt solid and familiar in his hands despite the leather straps that still bound his wrists, and Tom blessed his father's foresight in teaching him to shoot accurately under adverse conditions. Gabriel's second attack sent Morrison sprawling across the barn floor, his face and arms streaming blood from talon wounds that would leave permanent scars if he lived long enough for them to heal. The eagle's fierce cries filled the air as he positioned himself between Tom and the two remaining outlaws, his wings spread wide in a display of protective aggression that spoke to bonds deeper than mere friendship. Frank finally managed to draw his weapon and fire at Gabriel, but the eagle's aerial agility made him a nearly impossible target in the confined space of the barn. The bullet splintered a wooden beam inches from Gabriel's head, and the eagle responded by diving at Frank with the focused fury of a creature defending its territory and its chosen companion. Tom used the distraction to work his way into position behind a hay bale, where he could bring his revolver to bear on Morrison while Gabriel kept Frank occupied. His bound hands made accurate shooting difficult, but years of military training had taught him to adapt to challenging circumstances, and the range was short enough that precision mattered less than speed. Morrison was struggling to regain his feet, his own gun lost somewhere in the straw during Gabriel's assault, when Tom's voice cut through the chaos with the calm authority of a man who had faced death before and emerged victorious. "Don't move, Morrison. You're done." The outlaw leader turned toward Tom with blood streaming down his face and murder in his eyes. "You think that bird makes you dangerous, old man? I've killed better men than you with my bare hands." "Maybe so," Tom replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "But you won't get the chance to try." From the loft above came Billy's voice, weaker now and edged with pain. "Boss, I need help up here. I think this thing broke my arm." Gabriel had moved to perch on a beam directly above Morrison, the eagle's fierce gaze fixed on the man who had threatened to turn him into merchandise. Blood stained the golden feathers where Frank's bullet had grazed Gabriel's wing, but the wound appeared superficial compared to the damage the eagle had inflicted on his attackers. The sound of approaching hoofbeats penetrated even the storm's fury, growing louder with each passing second. The posse that Morrison had feared was finally arriving, drawn by the gunshots and probably following tracks that even the storm had not completely erased. Tom felt a surge of hope that rescue was at hand, but he knew that the next few minutes would determine whether he and Gabriel would survive to see justice done. Morrison seemed to realize that his situation had become desperate. With his companions wounded and ineffective, law enforcement closing in, and Tom armed and ready to shoot, the outlaw leader faced the collapse of everything he had hoped to accomplish. But desperate men were often the most dangerous, and Tom could see in Morrison's eyes the calculation of a man who had nothing left to lose. Morrison's desperate lunge toward his fallen revolver triggered the final, violent resolution of the confrontation that had been building since the outlaw's arrival. Tom's shot took Morrison's center mass, the heavy bullet from his father's Colt, spinning the outlaw leader around and sending him crashing into a stall door with bone-crushing force. But Morrison's reputation for survival had not been built on luck alone. Even mortally wounded, he managed to grasp his weapon and bring it to bear on Tom with the grim determination of a man intent on taking his enemy with him into death. Gabriel's intervention came with the speed and precision of a natural predator protecting its mate. The eagle dropped from his perch like a golden thunderbolt, striking Morrison's gun hand with talons that could crush bone and tear flesh with equal efficiency. The outlaw's final shot went wild, burying itself harmlessly in the barn's wooden wall, while his scream of pain and rage echoed through the structure. Frank, witnessing his leader's fall and Gabriel's continued assault, abandoned any pretense of loyalty and bolted for the barn's side door. Tom let him go, recognizing that a fleeing coward posed less immediate threat than a cornered one, and focused his attention on Morrison's condition. The outlaw leader lay motionless in the straw, his chest rising and falling in the irregular rhythm of a man whose life was measured in minutes rather than hours. Gabriel landed beside Tom, the eagle's golden eyes bright with the aftermath of combat, but already returning to the calm intelligence that Tom had come to know so well. Blood stained several of Gabriel's feathers where Frank's bullets had found their mark, and Tom could see that the eagle was favoring his left wing slightly. The wounds appeared superficial, but Tom's heart clenched at the sight of Gabriel injured again in defense of their bond. "You came back," Tom whispered, his voice rough with emotion and the realization of what Gabriel's return had meant. The eagle had been free, safely released to reclaim his wild life, but had chosen to return when Tom needed protection most. The magnitude of that sacrifice, a wild creature voluntarily entering captivity to defend his human friend, overwhelmed Tom with gratitude and humbling awareness of the depth of their connection. Gabriel cocked his head and uttered a soft sound that Tom interpreted as acknowledgement and perhaps gentle reproach, forever doubting that their bond transcended the simple relationship between caretaker and patient. The eagle's fierce loyalty had saved Tom's life, but at the cost of the freedom they had both worked so hard to achieve. The sound of splintering wood announced the arrival of the posse, as armed men forced entry through the barn's main door, with weapons drawn and ready for violence. Sheriff Thompson led the group, his weathered face showing relief when he spotted Tom alive and relatively unharmed among the wreckage of the confrontation. "Tom, you hurt?" Thompson called, his eyes taking quick inventory of the scene while his men secured the barn and checked on the various casualties. "I'm fine, Wade. Gabriel here did most of the work." Thompson's gaze fixed on the magnificent eagle perched beside Tom, noting the blood on Gabriel's feathers and the fierce intelligence in those golden eyes. The sheriff had seen enough violence in his years of law enforcement to recognize the aftermath of a deadly fight, and Gabriel's obvious wounds told their own story of courage and sacrifice. "Billy's up in the loft with what looks like a broken arm," Tom added, nodding toward the ladder, where moans and curses indicated that Morrison's youngest accomplice was still alive but in considerable pain. "Frank ran out the side door when things went bad. Morrison's over there, but I don't think he's going to make it." One of the deputy marshals knelt beside Morrison and confirmed Tom's assessment with a grim shake of his head. The outlaw leader's breathing had become increasingly labored, and the pool of blood beneath his body suggested massive internal damage that no frontier medicine could address. Morrison's eyes remained open and aware, but the fight had gone out of him entirely. As the lawmen secured the scene and tended to the wounded, Tom turned his attention to Gabriel's injuries. Using strips torn from his shirt and water from his emergency supplies, he began cleaning the bullet wounds with the same gentle care he had shown during Gabriel's original recovery. The eagle submitted to this treatment with patient dignity, occasionally wincing when Tom's ministrations encountered particularly tender areas. "That's one hell of a bird you've got there," Thompson observed, watching Gabriel's calm acceptance of medical attention with obvious admiration. "Never seen anything like what just happened. Most wild creatures would have run at the first sign of trouble." Tom looked up from his work on Gabriel's wing, meeting Thompson's curious gaze with complete honesty. "He's not mine, Wade. Never was. He chooses to be here. Chooses when to leave and when to come back. Today, he chose to save my life." Thompson nodded slowly, understanding passing between the two men who had shared enough dangerous situations to recognize the rare bonds that could form between unlikely companions. The sheriff had seen men die for their horses, their dogs, even their cattle in extreme circumstances, but he had never witnessed a wild eagle voluntarily enter combat to defend a human friend. Gabriel finished his inspection of Tom's bandaging work and settled beside him with the relaxed posture of a creature whose duty had been fulfilled. The eagle's presence provided comfort that went beyond the physical protection he had offered. Gabriel represented proof that love and loyalty could transcend the boundaries of species, circumstance, and expectation. As Morrison drew his final rattling breath, and Billy was helped down from the loft, with his arms splintered and his face pale with shock, Tom realized that the violent confrontation had fundamentally changed his relationship with Gabriel once again. The eagle had proven that their bond was strong enough to overcome even the most powerful wild instincts. But Tom understood that such sacrifice demanded reciprocal commitment. Gabriel had given up his freedom to save Tom's life, and Tom would spend whatever time they had together, ensuring that the eagle never regretted that choice. Whether Gabriel remained at the ranch permanently or continued to come and go as his wild nature dictated, Tom knew that their connection had been sealed by blood and battle in ways that would endure for both their lifetimes. The storm that had trapped them all together was finally beginning to weaken, its fury spent against the enduring strength of the high desert landscape. Through the barn's windows, Tom could see patches of blue sky appearing between the racing clouds, promising that the worst of nature's violence had passed. But the changes wrought by this day would endure long after the last raindrops had soaked into the thirsty earth. Thompson finished securing the scene and approached Tom with the satisfied expression of a lawman whose long pursuit had finally reached a successful conclusion. "We've been tracking Morrison's gang for 3 weeks, ever since they hit that bank in Albuquerque. You and your eagle here just closed the books on some very bad men." Tom nodded but found his attention drawn more to Gabriel's steady breathing and the gentle warmth of the eagle's presence beside him than to the abstract satisfaction of justice served. Morrison and his men had been swept from their lives as completely as the storm would be swept from the desert, leaving behind only the deeper understanding of what truly mattered in the brief span of years allotted to any living creature. As the posse prepared to depart with their prisoners and their grim cargo, Tom carefully lifted Gabriel and carried him toward the house where proper medical supplies waited. The eagle's trust in accepting this assistance spoke to the complete restoration of their partnership, and Tom felt his heart fill with gratitude for the unexpected gifts that life could offer to those patient enough to recognize them when they appeared. 6 weeks after the storm, Tom sat on his front porch in the golden light of early evening, watching Gabriel soar in wide circles above the valley with the effortless grace that marked a fully recovered bird of prey. The eagle's wounds had healed cleanly under Tom's careful attention, leaving only faint scars beneath the golden feathers and perhaps a deeper wariness that would serve Gabriel well in future encounters with the unpredictable nature of human beings. Their relationship had evolved into something neither man nor eagle could have anticipated during those first tentative days of healing in the barn. Gabriel came and went according to his own mysterious schedule, sometimes disappearing for days at a time to hunt in the vast wilderness beyond the ranch, but always returning to perch on the corral fence or the barn roof where Tom could see him and take comfort in his presence. Tom had come to understand that this arrangement suited them both perfectly. Gabriel retained his essential wildness and freedom while choosing to share part of his life with the human who had given him a second chance at flight. For Tom, Gabriel's voluntary returns provided ongoing proof that love freely given would be freely returned, and that healing was a gift that multiplied when shared between willing hearts. The leather-bound journal lay open on Tom's lap, its pages filled with careful observations about Gabriel's behavior, the changing seasons, and the gradual transformation of his own emotional landscape over the months since that day on the desert trail when their paths had first crossed. Tonight's entry would record Gabriel's successful hunt of a large jackrabbit that afternoon, executed with the kind of precision that marked a raptor in perfect health and full command of his abilities. But the journal contained more than simple observations of wildlife behavior. Tom had begun recording memories of Sarah with a clarity and joy that had been impossible during the dark years immediately following her death. Gabriel's presence had somehow given him permission to remember the laughter and love they had shared without being overwhelmed by the pain of loss, and Tom found himself able to honor his past while remaining open to whatever possibilities the future might hold. The ranch itself bore subtle signs of renewal that reflected Tom's changing state of mind. The house showed fresh paint on its adobe walls, and Sarah's garden had been replanted with herbs and flowers that attracted hummingbirds and butterflies. Tom had even begun accepting occasional invitations to town social functions, though he still preferred the quiet companionship of his animals and the vast beauty of the desert landscape. Doc Martinez had become a regular visitor, drawn initially by professional curiosity about Gabriel's recovery, but remaining because of his genuine friendship with Tom and his fascination with the bond between man and eagle. The elderly physician had witnessed enough of life's mysteries during his long career to appreciate the healing that could occur when two wounded souls found each other at exactly the right moment. "That bird has done more for your health than all my medicines combined," Doc Martinez had observed during his most recent visit, watching Gabriel perform aerial acrobatics that seemed designed purely for the joy of flight. Sometimes the best medicine comes in the most unexpected packages. Tom had nodded in agreement, understanding that Gabriel represented far more than companionship or even friendship. The eagle embodied the principle that healing was possible even from the deepest wounds, that trust could be rebuilt even after betrayal, and that love could take forms that transcended the conventional boundaries of human experience. As the sun settled toward the western horizon, painting the desert mesas in shades of red and gold that rivaled Gabriel's magnificent plumage, Tom rose from his chair and walked to the edge of the porch. Above him, Gabriel folded his wings and dropped in a controlled dive that brought him to a perfect landing on the corral fence, where he settled with the satisfied air of a creature well pleased with his day's activities. "Good hunting today," Tom observed, noting the eagle's full crop and relaxed posture. Gabriel cocked his head and uttered a soft sound that Tom had learned to interpret as contentment and acknowledgement. Tom opened his journal to a fresh page and carefully pressed 2 feathers between the clean white sheets. One golden feather from Gabriel's original injury, saved from that first day on the desert trail, and one darker feather lost during the fight with Morrison's gang. Together, they represented the complete journey from wounding to healing to the courage required to fight for the things that mattered most. The first feather spoke of fragility and the random cruelty that could shatter a life in an instant. The second represented the strength that could emerge from suffering and the willingness to risk everything to protect what had been gained through patience and love. Together, they told the story of transformation that had changed both eagle and man in ways that would endure long after their individual lives had ended. As darkness settled over the valley and Gabriel made his way to his chosen roost in the barn's highest rafters, Tom remained on the porch for a few more minutes, listening to the familiar sounds of the desert night and reflecting on the unexpected turns his life had taken since that morning when he had chosen compassion over convenience on a dusty trail. The future remained uncertain, filled with challenges and possibilities that he could not yet imagine. But Tom faced that uncertainty with the confidence of a man who had learned that healing was always possible, that love could take unexpected forms, and that the willingness to care for another living creature, whether human or eagle, was perhaps the most meaningful way to spend the brief years allotted to any soul, brave enough to open its heart to the mysteries of connection, grace. Gabriel's final call of the day echoed softly from the barn, a sound that Tom interpreted as good night and gratitude, and the promise of another day, shared between unlikely friends who had discovered that the deepest bonds were often forged in the crucible of mutual need and sustained by the recognition that some gifts were too precious to measure and too powerful to fully understand.